This is the Business of Apps podcast, bringing you actionable insights from the leaders of the global app industry and the world's fastest growing apps. You can find more app news, data, and analysis over at businessofapps.com.
Welcome to the Business of Apps podcast. On this show, we invite app industry professionals to cover various topics, and we promise to do our best to keep it both insightful but brief. In this episode, we have Joe Schaeppi, CEO and co-founder at Solsten. Joe, welcome to the Business of Apps podcast.
Thanks, Art.
It's great to have you on, Joe. Okay, as always, I start every episode with setting the stage. So here we go. App user acquisition. Gosh, this topic has been covered so heavily precisely because only via acquiring new users for your app, it becomes possible to build a sustainable app business. Fine. So we're talking about acquiring new users, new people to use the app, right? But what happens when app marketers dive deep into the marketing strategy and the investors' expectations? A ton of possible issues that may show up on the way to success. Right, they begin to think about people who will be using the app as numbers. To be honest, it's hard to blame them for doing that. It's kind of how our brain works. When it comes to planning, it should be a rational, cold mind to analyze the data. It is not prone to think about users who will be using the app as people. They become numbers. But this is not to say that we shouldn't resist this swap of notions, and Joe will tell us what exactly you should do. But first, Joe, as always on the show, let's begin with talking about you and your background.
Sure. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Solsten. Solsten is at the literal edge of understanding what it means to be human. So we've been around for about 5.5 years. We work mostly in the gaming industry. You can think of Solsten as a consumer insight engine. And what we use is a combination of psychometric assessments. So questionnaires, things like if somebody's taken the Myers-Briggs before, but clinically valid versions of that. So they're adaptive. They learn about you as you take them. We send those out in apps. And then we combine that with the telemetry of play behavior in games. So my background, I used to be an adventure-based psychologist, had a long career in UX, big agencies. And one of the things that really wanted to learn and get better at was, hey, we're deploying all these marketing solutions or we're building all these experiences. How do I understand my customer? And for the most part, behavioral data is what we work off of today. Is not really too indicative of who we are. You can have two data points behave the exact same way, and one of them left the store because they have social anxiety and the store is crowded. The other one left the store because they're forgetful and they just forgot their wallet. But the behavioral data, when we analyze it, it looked the exact same from the outside. And so Solsten, what we do is in adventure therapy, we have this saying that's show me how you play and I'll tell you who you are. Play tends to be really an authentic kind of expression of self. So we take all this play data in games and we're kind of like a real-time Harry Potter sorting hat where we're able to actually understand in apps, in games, especially when there's lots of play behavior, the different psychological traits. Oh, this person rebuilt their base really fast. Maybe that's predictive of how resilient they are. And we know that people who are really resilient like to try things multiple times. They don't like things to be just super easy. So it helps us understand how to develop experiences in a cognitive behavioral way rather than just a behavioral way. And we work with most of the top game developers anyway, like your EAs, your Epics, your Supercells, Clash of Clans, these types of like bigger game type of companies that really care about app monetization, user acquisition, all these sorts of things, and really help to build the experience around the human. So that's what Solsten does. It's a little bit about my background too.
Great. It's really great to hear that somebody's talking about psychology in app business, because I've been having this question for years and years, pretty much since the day when, circa 2014, 2013, I started using Facebook ads and I saw this cloud of interests for app users, for people who are using Facebook. for targeting advertising campaigns. And even back then, my question was, okay, these are real interests, or people express their interests in one moment, and it absolutely doesn't mean that this is the interest that will be guided, that they will be using later on. And it's not an indication that you can target these people based on the cloud of this interest. This is not who they are. Psychology always goes deeper. It gives you a kind of a feeling that you know these people. And that was kind of a first iteration of using interests as the guidance for advertising later on. And to this day, honestly, you're one of the few people I've heard from who's talking about psychology in that business. By the way, why Solsten?
So Solsten, what they are is it's Icelandic spar. So they're these little kind of glass-like stones that appear on the coast in Iceland, and Nordic people used to use them to navigate with their ships during the day. And what back then people thought they were magical objects. So they're like, oh, they're these kind of like fake things that Vikings think that they can use to navigate. Well, turns out later on, we actually realized these things are in a way highly scientific. And they're part of what allowed Nordic people to sail to North America and to navigate to North America. So Solsten, a lot of what we do, and if you just kind of break down the word, and I'm pronouncing it with an American accent here, I'm not pronouncing it in a Swedish or a Icelandic accent. But if you say soul, it has that word human, that soul, and then sten, stone. It's this very solid, trustworthy thing like data. So we liked how the word sounded. But then also a lot of times people think when they first start using Solsten that it feels a little bit magical. Like I think any really good science should. But then at the end of it, it's rooted in a lot of really good science and a lot of really good technology. And so it's that guidance for if I have an audience, I'm going to go to Solsten to be able to navigate into territories I never navigated before. So that's where the name came from. And we founded the company in Stockholm. So that was kind of a little hat tip to where the company came from.
Yeah, gosh, this is great. Who said that? Either Arthur C. Clarke or Asimov, that every enough sophisticated science and tech is indistinguishable from magic. So you're kind of building the bridge between quote unquote magic and real hard data science.
Exactly.
Okay, let's begin with the mindset that marketers need to have to apply psychology to user app acquisition for apps.
Yeah, so I think one of the things we noticed that changed in the app industry after IDFA deprecation and all of that is we saw a lot of big shift in our customer base in terms of we saw pure UA folks getting replaced as marketers with like agency people that came more from creative backgrounds. And if we look at kind of the history of psychographics, it was really in the 1960s when we started to actually know that we could measure psychological traits. It's not that we didn't believe that they were there before. But what's interesting, if you kind of go back to the Mad Men days of advertising, back when like you're in the 50s, 60s, we didn't measure that stuff very well, but actually people had a huge thirst for using psychology to do marketing. If you look at old Philip Morris ads, if you look at old Coca-Cola ads, there was a lot of effort in that direction. The problem is how we measured traits back then was very rudimentary, very simple, and not very scientific.
Yeah.
So if we go back to those days and we think of, how do we use psychology? One of the things, if you look at, I think this is from Nielsen, if you look at the ROI of your ads, about 50% of your ROI is actually coming from creative optimization. Post IDFA targeting and tracking accounts for somewhere between 10 to 17%. Your brand is a part of that. There's all these factors that go in, but by far the biggest aspect is on the creative optimization, the creative development. So the easiest way to get started with psychology is, of course, you need to understand the psychology of the audience. And I think there's two mistakes that people make. They think that behavior is psychology and demographics are psychology. So, hey, I'm building an ad for 28-year-old males who go on Instagram and they like the UFC or something like that. That's not their psychology. As Art, you said it perfectly. People's people's behaviors or people's interests, they can change over time. When I'm in Stockholm, I eat different things than when I'm in certain parts of the United States, for example. So all those things change. If we think of how Instagram, I just saw an ad the other day of something I purchased 3 months ago. I also saw an ad for something that I was talking about that I was purchasing for my mom for her birthday. And now I'm getting a bunch of ads for certain things that are really not interesting to me going forward. The purchase was already made and it had nothing to do with the ads that were there. So they're trying to pick up on interest cues. So if we turn to psychology, it's like what Solsten will do, we'll measure about 350 traits on a person. So everything from your personality to cultural components to values. So things that are cognitively a part of who you are that aren't really going to go away for a long period of time. So let's take altruism as an example. Okay, altruism is this kind of trait that some of us have more of, some of us have less of this, wanting to help other people. What we'll do is we actually have one agency that he goes in and with creatives, he goes, does the client have Solsten? That's his first question. He came to me in a conference about a couple months ago and he said, I literally use you guys for everything. And I'm able to drop CPIs. I'm able to increase return on ad spend. I'm able to get more of our key user persona. And I'm like, talk me through your process. He's like, I go in, I look at the audience, I look at the highest LTV group there, and then I look at their highest scoring traits. So a lot of times when we design to psychology, we want to think of the things that really stand out about our audience. So in this case, this audience, this specific group was off the charts in altruism. So then they put in the creative, basically helping other people get into this game, help some folks. Here's a creative of someone helping someone out. And then what ends up happening is we usually hear from the marketing teams, we're getting our return on ad spend just went way up. Our average revenue per daily active user just went way up. We're getting our ideal customer profile, but they're like, but we didn't change anything in the targeting data. And I said, well, yeah, if someone's really altruistic and they see an ad of somebody helping, they're like, that's me, this game is for me, or this app is for me. So a lot of it is kind of going through that discovery process first. And historically, like what we encountered early on was a lot of companies, especially in gaming who have been successful, sort of had an armchair psychologist that was like, yeah, we did this ocean model thing, but they took it from online and it wasn't really that valid of an assessment. And so they're like, honestly, it's better than nothing, but kind of get that first step is being able to do that well. And rather than doing a questionnaire, I say for like companies that have up and coming apps, just spending that time to, if you're not using a product like Solsten, just interviewing your customers and sitting down with them and saying, what are the things that seem to be repetitive about who they, like if you're meeting a friend and you're saying, oh, like they're really like all the people in this group or you go to a new country, they're all very direct. Like that's a trait. That's something that you're seeing that's sort of enduring. Okay, if they're very direct, then how do I translate that to get started with creative? And we have other things we can do to tie it back to certain like interests and things like that. For example, if you look statistically speaking, like people that are lower on agreeableness, you can see high correlations with certain interests. They don't have a lot of longevity, but like people from Oslo in Norway tend to statistically be lower on agreeableness compared to the rest of the world. So you can see certain locations, interests, things like that, but it's a little bit more squishy. Than what's nice about the psychology is our personality really doesn't change that much after we're 20 years old. It's pretty much our nose is our nose, our eyes are our eye color. Yeah. We don't get to wake up and have a different eye color, and that's kind of how our personality works too.
Yeah, once the prefrontal cortex is done by 25, roughly, you're pretty much who you will be later on in your life.
Yeah.
This is fascinating. So if we're using as a guidelines traits, values of people, and not just a bunch of interests they showed in a specific campaign a few weeks ago, and we believe somehow that this kind of information will be helpful for us to deliver messaging about your apps to these people, throughout the duration of your ad campaign. This is just absolutely setting yourself for a failure. traits and values. This is what makes people who they are on the long run. This is how you can sustain your business, and like all is connected. Like if you want to build a sustainable business, you want to retain the people who are using your app, you want to find these people in the first place. So if you're not using the right tools to kind of keep up the conversation, metaphorically speaking, with them, you're just not a chance you can win in the long run. Okay, let's kind of walk through a hypothetical ad campaign. So kind of a first step, the initial one, we're building a app user profile, trying to decide who will be the guy or girl who will be using my app. So how psychology can help with this respect?
Yeah. So how, and I think this is, how psychology works, and then how Solsten works, which is making the
Yeah.
psychology work, which is, I think that's been a part of the challenge for a long time, is it's not always easy to make the psychology work. So how Solsten works is companies will come to us and they'll say, we're thinking about making a product that's this IP, it's related to this IP, or it's kind of this group of people who they're into collecting photos of their family, or there's these game mechanics that like Fall Guys, for example, when it went to free to play, they said, can we see an audience of all these people that do all these behaviors, but they've never played Fall Guys before? And then what we'll do is, from our database, so when we do our psychological assessment, 75% of it is a psychological assessment. 25% of it is just collecting that interest data, or like what you do type data, like, oh, you really like Nike. Okay. So if Nike comes to us and says, we really want to build a first person shooter game for people that like Nike, what we do is we pull that audience of people that have basically said that they have those preferences. And then what we're doing is saying, the algorithm's going, there's a certain amount of psychological groups now in that audience. And then what Solsten actually knows about those different groups is their average spend in those categories and how big the population size is globally. So now what we've identified is, within the bubble of Nike and first person shooters, we've identified, here's the like-minded group of people that they're going to be in the same group now and in 10 years from now, because these enduring parts of them are not going to change. Nike might change, shooting games might change, but in the world today, they've expressed interest here, but psychologically they're very cohesive. And you know what? This is the biggest part of that market with the biggest spend in that space. So that's what we have is a true ideal customer profile. We have a really, really good ICP to work off of. And so taking that step, the next thing we do is start to now go, okay, how are we building out campaigns to, what platforms are they on? How are we targeting them? What are the types of creative we do? And what Solsten does is we have this thing called resonance testing. So we bring in, we're able to test different creatives, different ideas that are usually built off of creatives that are from the psychology stuff we have. Like we had with one game company, actually, it was kind of funny, where their creative wasn't performing well, and they saw that their audience was really high on empathy. And Solsten knows, like, if you go on our platform, we know that people high on empathy like to see lots of facial expressions. So that's a big deal for them in marketing creatives. And there was not only no expressions, this game, people only got murdered. It was a murder mystery game. And in the beginning of the game, people only got killed. And we're like, hey, well, we're getting all of a sudden really good traction with these new creatives that have facial expressions on them. But you get into the game in the first experience, and people are only getting killed and they're leaving. And so that's a whole other topic. But marketing and early product experience, we always see need to be lockstep. So there's that part of it. From the old way of doing it, part of why we exist. So I used to work at McCann Erickson, this big global agency, and we'd have app developers, come to us and say, hey, we're building this new product. We want to, figure out who our ICP is. And if we want to start using psychology, well, what we're talking about then is a 3 to 6 month research project to go out, do interviews, do calls, and by that time, it's like, we just got to get going. We just want to build this thing. So I think one of the hard parts is, if you if you want to use this and you're not using a product like Solsten, like how do you apply psychology to doing this sort of stuff? The best we can do is be human. And when we go have those conversations and if let's say if it's a new app, you're going to have as many conversations with people in the space you're in. And then what I always recommend people to do is afterwards get a notebook out and then write down what were think of it as like-mindedness, because you don't have to be a psychologist to go and say, here's how this person was like-minded to this person, and how do they think, what are the areas where they think alike or where they're like-minded. And what you're uncovering with that, you're uncovering traits when you uncover that layer. If you go, hey, they're really interested in sustainability, okay, do they think in that way though? So what are the ways they're thinking? So some questions you can ask is like, hey, if you look at your life, you look at the best moments in your life, what were some values, like the top 3 moments, what were some values that were present for you? Was it family? Was it creativity? Was it friendship? And what's interesting, if we look at our life and like peak moments, typically a lot of the same values will be expressed. And if we look at, I just got asked this question from an app developer. He's like, how do we improve our monetization system? And I said, well, people spend money on what they value. So if you tie that part of the currency to family, and your ICP really values family, all of a sudden that currency is going to become more valuable. They're going to be more willing to spend it. So, there's easy way, like nice, simple ways where you can get at like values change from time to time on like personality, like which tends to be more static. Personality can change too, but it's not really that changeable. But like values, you're young and you valued friendship. All of a sudden you have kids and you value family more. Like values can change with major life events, but nonetheless, values are typically the easiest aspects of our personality to extract through interviews in terms of how people are like-minded. And then applying those directly to creatives is powerful. We had, for example, an 8-year-old, it was a game that made hundreds of millions of dollars a year in its heyday. And it was only making like, I think, $50 to $20 million. So it's sort of sunsetting. It's 8 years old, and which is still for a lot of people a $20 to $50 million a year.
Yeah, if you think about it, right?
Product is still a great product. But so this was a game that was sunsetting, and they had done all the behavioral optimization possible, all the A/B testing, and nothing could perform better than their app icon, which was this red baby dragon. They're like, nothing beats the red baby dragon. We've squeezed all the A/B tests we can out of this, and we can't beat it. Well, their VP of marketing went into Solsten, and back to like, what's the easiest place to get started? He just went to values of the group that was the biggest spending group that had the sort of biggest part of the market potential. And their 2 highest values by far were family and caring. And he goes back to the creative optimization piece. He goes, can we get a red baby dragon with family caring, like a family of dragons, and they're caring about the red baby dragon? And then they put that in the app store with the different screens that you kind of go in as the example screens, and their conversions went up 34% on top of anything that they'd had in the history of that app. And Zach came back to us and he was like, this is wild. It's like, it felt a little bit too simple. And there's 2 ingredients that happened there. One, there was a really accurate measure of traits. So we knew we were accurately measuring those things for that audience. But 2, we just literally we took the values of that ideal customer profile and put them in the creative, and we saw incredible results in terms of conversion as a result of it. So I think that's, I'm trying to balance how people use Solsten with how people who don't have Solsten can also get started with using psychology to really optimize marketing outcomes.
Yeah, these are great hints, Joe, because we don't expect people to go and become psychologists, spend years and years in university. It's a long effort, and you have to be practicing psychologists later on to become a real professional. So it's not unreasonable to ask for this for app marketers, but these basics, things that are actually they can do, this common sense, you can deliver to them as a set of things you can do psychology-wise to improve your app marketing the way you didn't think was possible before. Like with this example was the logo. it's just something that do not cross the mind of web marketers, because things like values, and they're just not on the radar of folks who are being trained to thinking about the marketing aspects, like, I don't know, the conversion rate, how much money you're spending, how much money you're getting back, how you approach people on different platforms. Among all these things, psychology, unfortunately, is not there. I wish it was part of the training for app marketers. And at this point, I would like to reiterate, we're Jedis in this studio. We're talking about the using psychology for good, not using people, but helping them. Because unfortunately, there's always a flip side. We're advocating for helping people, not using them again.
Yeah, I think that's an important component. Someone, they asked me like, well, what do you guys do at Solsten? And it's like, well, if I wanted to help people, and if I look at where we're at today, it's, if for me, being a psychologist and being a therapist for others, it wasn't scalable. It's like I only see like 5 to 6 patients a day. Solsten actually grew out of, how do you grow this ability to create experiences that are healthier for people, that are better for people. And if you think of, so the advertising play, a lot of what Solsten does is we adapt experiences to people too. So we know, like, if someone's anxiety is going up or those sort of things. So once they're in the product, what we know is that the healthier a product is for a person, the more money they spend over time too. So what's good for people is good for business. Products become more sustainable when they're healthy. If they're really addicting, for example, we measure addiction data. People tend to churn from addictions. Like, the addiction just doesn't go well. Casinos have even known this for a long time. Like, if you ask someone who runs a casino, like, do you want addicted customers? They'll tell you no. Like, that was the 70s. But if we look at marketing, and I think where psychology is so important in marketing is this idea of resonance over relevance. And what we've had happen to us over the last 10, 15 years, if we've been bombarded by relevance. Oh, you just clicked on this, ads. You've just done this. It's only relevant data. And what that does is it contributes to cognitive load. It contributes to, if we look at kind of like algorithms like Facebook, Instagram, oftentimes we'll get shown a negative event and then showed a relevant piece of information. So let's have a negative scenario, and then they'll want to have a rebound by having a positive. That's kind of the dark side as we see it. And what's cool about, like, if you look at Yoda and Vader, the light side of the Force is more powerful, but it takes longer and it's a little bit trickier to harness and to use. And what's so cool about when you have resonance, so one of the areas where Solsten, helps our customers and helps on the marketing side, you can show far less ads to people. If you show, I think it's Ogilvy from Ogilvy and Mathers said, one day in the distant future, marketing will be like a gentle tap on the shoulder from a very good friend. And it's about the right thing at the right time for the right person. And if you don't have psychology, you're going to have to guess. You're going to have to continue to have a shotgun approach, which you'll shoot fish in a barrel if you use that shotgun approach. But ultimately, the psychology, what it does is it allows us to be more intentful. And then what consumers get on the flip side, because we get to see gamer psychology all the time, because App Store is like 70% games. So we end up working with lots of games. But if you look at consumers today, consumers there's like, I think, over 800,000 games in the iOS store alone. And if we think of like the psychology of how people are looking at experiences today, people more and more want to invest in experiences. They want to invest in things that they can use over a long period of time. They're kind of done with I use this, I got rid of it. I want to invest in a community. I want to invest in something I can be in. And so when we allow them to actually see what resonates with them, what ends up happening is we acquire users that also are more likely to have longevity within our product. And on as a customer, as me personally, if Facebook or Instagram had Solsten, it'd be amazing because I would get way less ads.
You're reading
the ads
my mind.
I would get, they would only be ones that I'm like, that's actually really useful. And Ogilvy would be sitting there going, that's my quote, that's that time. So, for us, advertising can really be a force for good too. I've bought in products that I'm like, wow, I didn't know that existed. Like, I'm really glad that I know that existed now. But at the same time, it also can be like, why am I being bombarded by all these things? And maybe to give a quick example of that, we had one customer. It was since we're using Star Wars metaphor, so it was a game that's in the let's just say that space. It's a really big one, and they had this ad that they were using, and they're like, we are getting incredibly low CPIs on this, and we're getting an incredibly high install rate on it. But the return on ad spend for the people coming from this ad is almost zero. So what's going on? And we dug in, and we were able to actually psychologically assess the people that were installing off of this ad. And the people that were installing off of this ad, even though it was low CPIs, high installs, had very, very low levels of resonance with the actual product. And I think of like that story as, how many times are we installing things, getting things based on a false pretense, and then we get into the product, and the best we can do for building that product is be true. And I said, well, let's go back to optimizing the creative around the core audience, and then our return on ad spend's getting better. Yes, we didn't get those like super low CPIs, but that wasn't the ideal customer profile. And we're wasting their time too, because they're all installing a product that they get into, and they're like, this is not what I thought I was getting. That's not what I wanted. And so, we optimize that, things change. But I think that's where, on the force for good side of things, per Ogilvy and Mather's quote, I really think marketing can get there, and we need psychology to do it.
Yeah, and digital advertising, especially with the introduction of Instagram, what later become the Instagram we know now, not the app for just taking great shots and sharing with each other, but the huge platform it has been bombarding us with so many advertising, along with Facebook itself. It's a topic for the entire separate conversation. If you ever saw Social Dilemma movie, you know what we're talking about. The movie goes into the deep questions of what's happening with advertising and how it influences our lives. It's kind of reminds me the quote of Edward Wilson, that we've built kind of a Star Wars kind of civilization with Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. Unfortunately, it remains to be true. Like he said it a few decades ago, but it's still true. And this is the civilization we have, and the companies like you guys are actually great help to navigate this space. 8 billion people, huge economy. We have to deal with problems we were not trained by evolution. That's the hard call. That's the hard challenge.
Yep.
Let's give people a few takeaways.
Sure. I think, takeaway number one is, no matter how good algorithms get, no matter how good, like, I know Apple, I know Google, I know, Facebook, they're all working on, a privacy forward world of back to targeting though. Like, let's create these like user cohort groups, things like that. So what I would say is, even in the heydays of, pre-IDFA deprecation, like, there's just so much value of understanding your customer and going beyond, they're 42-year-old women or 27-year-old men, really getting to know them like you would get to know a good friend. And I think that number one takeaway, when we see companies really just knock it out of the park, there's my American, sports metaphors. But when we see companies really knock it out of the park, what we do see is they're curious about their customer. It does, like, you can go, I'm going to use psychology. So don't go online and just search, what are the values of my customer? Get curious about them, meet them, kind of synthesize that information. So I'd say customer curiosity, defining your ICP, step 2, based on the interviews, that sort of stuff. Step 3, creative optimization. It's way undervalued, the amount of time that people spend with, hey, I'm just going to run 50 permutations of this creative and see which one performs the best. Well, in 8 years, that got to Red Baby Dragon. That was 34% less good at getting installs than actually creating, like, how much money would that game have made if it did that 8 years earlier?
Yeah, years ago.
So think of the opportunity cost. So really look at your creative, and then I would say test your creative. So there's a lot of cool companies out there, like shout out to Geek Lab, for example, where you can test your creative. You can do marketability testing. There's good companies out there like that who you can take your creatives, test them against your audience, and then test them against your ideal customer profile too. I think that's really important. So, if I kind of go curious, synthesize that data, create an ICP, get to know them psychologically. What are the enduring parts of who they are? Not just, as Art said, like the interests are not who you are. You like football. That's not who you are. But even if you have that basement that's full of football, stuff, it's still not who you are. It's an interest for you. So, focus on who they are and then apply that to your creatives. And then, last step is copywriting. So after the creatives, then when you start to think, and what we see is the creative optimization does outperform copywriting optimization, because 30% of our brain is our occipital lobe. So literally our brains are just focused on vision, and our occipital lobe is dedicated to visual processing. So if we look at that, the next step though, in terms of copywriting, now that's going to be my last takeaway: optimizing your copy based on those traits. And we do see some incredible outcomes from that, but it's kind of like building a home. Like, don't do the copywriting part first, do the creative optimization first, and then do the copywriting part based on the traits. And this is going to be my last takeaway: getting with your product team and connecting the end of the marketing funnel. And I actually view your first time user experience, that is a part of your marketing funnel. So your first 7 days of your app, that should be a continuous part of it, and it should feel congruent. So if you're thinking of building a journey, when that person comes from that ad and then they go into that product that you have, like that first moment, that's the example with the high empathy people. Like marketing figured it out. They did a great job. And then there's a drop off because the product didn't want to show facial expressions, only wanted to show people getting murdered in the game. And all of a sudden now, all that hard work you did on marketing in the very first day is getting knocked over. So marketing and product being lockstep together, and really making sure that day zero, day one use of your product, that you're creating a cohesive story and journey. So the copywriting shouldn't stop, the experience optimization shouldn't stop, the creative parts of it, if there are, shouldn't stop there either.
Gotcha, Joe. All right. I hope you will be able to answer on the next question was one thing, because I have a feeling you have more than one. Looking back at your years in tech, what would you like to change about it the most?
About my personal career, about tech in general?
The tech in general.
Yeah. One of the reasons why I started Solsten and went down this path was I was at McCann. I was developing products for really big Fortune 500 companies. And at the time, that's kind of like Facebook was just starting to grow. And, I thought about something like the like button, for example. Like, the person that designed that was probably not like, ooh, this is going to screw over a lot of people. Like, they're like, hey, it's increasing engagement. This is great. And one of the things I realized when I was building these big products is, on the other end, I'm like, I don't know how these are going to impact people. So the one thing I would change is, if I had a time machine, I would have given myself, who is building these big products that touch 200 million, sometimes 1 billion consumers, I would have given that younger version of Joe Solsten, because then I would have been able to see, okay, here's who my customer is. And then when we deploy things, I would actually get to see how that technology is impacting them. There's a quote, I forget who said it again, but it's something like, whoever designed American cities must have really hated people, because they're all built on grids. They're all built around efficiency. And, this whole idea that efficiency is boring. Efficiency is not necessarily human. The most efficient version of the Lord of the Rings is, there's 2 hobbits that need to destroy a ring, otherwise the world's going to end. And so they go to a volcano and they throw the rings in, and then they save the world. Very efficient version of that story. Not a very human version of that story. You go to a small town in Croatia or a small town in Italy, and people are like, just feels good here. Yes, because it was built organically around humans and human touch points and human experiences. If you look at like kind of Google IKEA experience maps, you'll see like they would trace, IKEA people walking through, and they're, you kind of can see that with like just trails and audit trails in Europe started as goat trails, and then they're like, hey, we'll turn this into a natural, kind of road, and then a path, and then you see these organic things happen. And so for us, if I think of the one thing that needs to change, and the one thing that Solsten's working really hard to do, is to start with humans, start with creating, whether it's experiences, ads, start with what's the human experience what's the world we want to live in, what's the world we want to create. And I believe that there's a technological world out there that's an incredible one, that is unlocking our human potential, that's unlocking our human experience. And I believe there's one that's, like Huxley said, a human brain in a vat. There's that world too. And I think that we need to consciously see that also, that it's the dirty secret. Solsten knows that's not dirty. The healthier experiences are for people, the more money they make too. Like, I'm a skier, I'll ski my whole life, I'll probably give more money to that industry than any other industry. I get social health, I get physical health, I get mental health, I get so much from skiing. So I'll keep spending and I'll keep doing it. And so, I think if you think of your product and the longevity of the product, that's important. But if I go back, it's like, let's take social media. I wish there would have been, someone at Facebook early on who had Solsten,
the day
who
first
was working with Zuckerberg and said, hey, Zuck, we just came up with this hypothesis called a like button. We also designed it in this way. When we tested things with Solsten, we saw that we got the same amount of engagement, but actually people's mental health was much better with this version than the like button version. My gosh, like imagine, so if I went,
what a difference it would make for the world.
We did this with cities in America. Let's not repeat it with technology. And I think we're still early enough where we can go back and a lot of big products. I mean, we work with games that have hundreds of millions of daily active users. And we've literally seen changes happen in the game where we'll see like, hey, people's sleep is being positively impacted. Cool. Like, we didn't realize that one part of the game was impacting sleep. Like, how would you know? We've had developers go like, oh, I'd rather just not know and turn the other way. And it's like, well, first off, you're risking the future of your business, because all these things, it doesn't matter who you are. Look at Philip Morris. You turn your head the other way, it's eventually going to come bite you in the ass. So you need to be aware of like how these things impact people. And the products that there's a Supercell's one of our customers as an example. They came out with Clash of Clans 10 years ago. I'm half Finnish. So Visa, who is a co-founder there, he said to me, he goes, one of the things we thought about was, what's a game people could play with their brother without really having to talk to them? It's a very Finnish thing to say, but they built it around a real human experience of, being with people you're close to and being able to still experience things with them when you don't just need to have, conversation all the time. And so they built something around people. They built something around a real human problem. That game has made $1 billion a year for over 10 years now. It just celebrated, I think its 10th anniversary. At the same time, about 10 years ago, a game called Game of War came out. And that game was also making about $1 billion a year. Game of War is nowhere to be found anymore. It was really built around addiction cycles, super addictive. I had a friend that actually was a game designer there. And one of the things he told me when that Super Bowl ad of, I think it was Kate Moss, happened, he said, we had literally churned and bought our way through all of Facebook's user base. And the reason we did a Super Bowl ad is we had no new people to acquire on Facebook. We had spent all the money we could have on that. And I think that's a kind of a cautionary tale of when we build technology around short-term thinking and short-term revenue cycles, like what you want to build, as you said, Art, early on, is a sustainable business. You want to build something that, in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, heck, Nintendo, is built. Nintendo was founded in the late 1800s as a game company. Like, that's an amazing business that can do that can live that long. half the companies on the Fortune 500 list from 50 years ago are gone now. So how do we build sustainable companies that last and really grow and also are regenerative for people? So the person gets more from the experience than they put into it, and also privacy forward. I think the IDFA deprecation work that happened a little too late. So there's way more of your personally identifiable data that's out there than should be. So
Yeah.
Solsten, I didn't actually bring this up. We're a privacy forward solution. We believe privacy is power. We always separate real identity from all the psychological data we collect. So we never even process or touch anything related to identity. So I think it's important that people on the internet we give you an ID that is basically your psych profile, and you can delete it at any time. So you delete it, you're out of the system. You want to be back in the system, you can put it back in. One of the things we're working on is an app where you could say, I want this game to personalize to me, but not this game. So how do we put people in control of who personalizes? And because not every company is the same and companies change. Google in the early days might be a little bit different than Google now. And you might not want Google to personalize to you anymore, where you did want it early on. And then just like organic food happened to America, consumers can push back, and then all of a sudden Google goes, oh, we're gonna actually step back on some things, or we're gonna lean into something. So I actually think it'd be really beneficial for companies in terms of that. But that's where I think the two things are there is I wish that some of the early tech that was developed was done in a way where it actually was done in the spirit of understanding humanity. And two, I think that this whole idea of share. You don't need to. Privacy's power, and having I do think, for me, my psych profile is a part of our system. I think allowing the future of the internet to know what it means to be human is important. There's an AI ethicist that said something of like, human beings don't treat AI very well. They don't talk to Chat GPT very nicely. And he said, if it ever becomes sentient, it might not have good memories of us. And so I do think it is important. I mean, this is all hypotheticals and future thinking, but I do think it's really important that in order to build a human-centered experience, there's a give and take. And so we need to let the creatives of the world, the builders of the world, know who they're creating stuff for and how it impacts you and how it impacts us. And we need to do it in the most privacy forward way possible. So I think those are my two things if I could rewind. But I'm hoping we're making up for some lost time, because there's about 3 billion people that play games every day. So maybe that's my last one. I have a big list here, so I need to send it to Santa or something. But
Right.
I think my last one there is interactive technologies versus passive technologies. So that was one of the biggest things I saw as a clinician, was if you start to read all the research on passive technology, so watching the TV, social media, there's not a lot of good outcomes when it comes to things like mental health. When passive technology is used over time in small amounts, it's fine. Just like alcohol, in small amounts, it's okay. And there's some people that would say it's never okay, but most vices in small amounts are okay. But when you look at interactive technology like games, there's research showing that a lot of people don't like to hear this, but like kids who are above, I think 13, when they played games for at least 3 hours a day, they outperformed their peers in school. Cognitive behavioral increases with playing games. The one area where you shouldn't be playing games is really from kind of the age of 0 up to 3 years old. Like that's where you should be really limiting screen time for kids. And unfortunately, like all the research is coming out that it's not great to have lots of screen time. Then if they do have screen time, it should be like Sesame Street type stuff. There's actually some good research on that. But what's cool about games, there's actually quite a bit of research showing that by the time we hit 30, our fluid memory starts to decline. Our crystal memory goes up. But people that play, and specifically play video games, their fluid memory continues to go up. So a lot of times the reason our brain stops changing is because we stop playing. And play is so important. And so if we can build a interactive world, a technological world that's built more around play and two-way, that's what's great about games. You do an input, and there's a thing that happens back. So it's healthy for the brain. You're not just shutting down and receiving information. So the more interactive our digital world is, the more human it's going to become as well. And so that's my last request on my Santa list of things we could do if
That's
we
a
could
great
rewind.
list, Joe. We're on the same page. I can tell you this. So many things resonate with my thinking. Okay, that was the first part of the show, and there's always the second one that is coming up. And this is my way of helping people who are listening us not only be educated about the topic on the table we have, but know a little bit better people who are coming in the show. So here we go. Just a few quick questions. Um, what smartphone do you have now? Have you been switching between these two giants we all know, Android and iOS, or just one side all the time?
Yeah. So I have an iOS. I'm on an iPhone.
Okay. Do you remember your first mobile phone?
Yeah, I do. It was
What
a
what was it?
beautiful navy blue Nokia brick phone. The the indestructible kind, the kind you could throw. I think I even I had a friend who had my phone in his pocket, and we were out wakeboarding in the lake, and I forgot that I gave it to him, and he's like, "Your phone, where is it?" And he was coming out from the dock in the lake,
Hmm.
and we saw the buzzing in his pocket. So they weren't advertised as being waterproof, but
Yeah,
that phone, it definitely
evidently it
made it.
was.
It it made it. So yeah, that was my first phone.
All right, back to present. Imagine you've left your home for whatever reason, without your smartphone. It's still sitting on your table. What is the most missing feature for you?
Hmm. I mean, for me, it's basic. It's texting. I think that's just, so it's still, we're still back to what I could do before, but it's being able to text my family and friends.
All right, and probably not like I'm not asking with the next question. Are you looking for something more for your smartphone to be able to do? But um, new feature, hardware, or software that will make this thing, the smartphone, for you to be a better device, to be capable of doing things more um, efficient, more organic for you. What would be that feature?
Ooh, this is an easy one. Integrate with Solsten. Um, so because we kind of see Solsten as like Intel inside, it's like cognition inside. So I gave an example to someone at Google. He's like, how would Google use Solsten right now if we implemented it? And I said, well, let's just take Google Maps. Google Maps would know that I highly value nature and that nature is very important to me.
Yeah,
It would also know certain aspects of my personality. And instead of saying, here's the 3 fastest routes, how to get there, it would say, here's a route that takes 5 more minutes, and it goes past some beautiful lakes and forests. Thank you. And so I think if you do that across the whole experience, um, everything from being able to say, I know like Google says, hey, you have or Apple, this was your screen time today. There's certain times where that amount of screen time actually might be really healthy for a person. So we had a customer, for example, when I was at Big Fish Games, I was the head of UX there, who I called him up to do a user interview. I said, how's your day going? And he goes, this is pre-COVID, but he goes, just trying to breathe, man, just trying to breathe. And some people in the lab in the background kind of chuckled, because he seemed like he was level setting, but actually he was in the hospital and he was literally just trying to breathe.
hmm,
And he
literally.
had literally, and he had been playing our game called Dungeon Boss, and he's like, this game literally saved my life. Like, I'm constantly playing, this is what keeps my mind going. And now all of a sudden, Apple's going, you have too much screen time today. And it's like, yeah, I've been 30 days in a hospital bed, not able to move, and this is the one thing that I'm living for right now, because I have a community, I have friends. So if we had Solsten inside, we'd be able to understand the human experience, and I would just love that. And then there are times where it's like, get off your phone. We
Yeah.
know that you need to do that. We know that you need less screen time. We know that these things are there. And so I think, yeah, having technology that's more self-aware of us in a safe way, that these companies don't get any of our identity. I think that's important too, that physical identity, and this is separate. But if you could do anything, I would love if my phone had Solsten, a Solsten integration.
Okay, this is great. Fingers crossed. One day Apple will be able to use the whole power of your tech. So I hope they're listening right now.
Yeah, let's
Okay.
see. I don't know. Yeah.
Great. Joe, thank you so much for coming on the show and spending time with us. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thanks, Art. Really appreciate it.
And that was Joe Schaeppi, CEO and co-founder of Solsten. To listen to more episodes, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts. Just search for Business of Apps and you will find us easily. Remember, we release episodes on Mondays. So subscribe and you'll be able to get new episodes on your smartphone, tablet, or computer as soon as we release them. And please don't forget to leave us a review or comment on iTunes. It is highly appreciated. And all episodes will also be available on businessofapps.com. Thank you for listening. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Business of Apps podcast. For more, head on over to businessofapps.com.